Attunement is a word that's a very powerful word in the context of the path of self-realization, in the context of Ananda, because of the way Swami Kriyananda would talk. It was just often spoken about. And what's being promised in this reading, which is the same as what Jesus promised, I am the vine and thou art the branches, and if it serves, it will flourish, and if it doesn't serve, it will be cut off and cast into the fire. The more brutal aspects of Christianity are generally toned down by most ministers. The more brutal aspects of self-realization are often toned down. I remember early on in my experience of trying to share these teachings, on several occasions, Swamiji scolded me. It was actually, we were having a very interesting discussion among several of us who were just beginning to do this kind of work. And Swamiji was correcting one man because he said that the man became enamored of his own ideas and would present his ideas with great eloquence, but he didn't seem to know that there was anyone in the room. He would just be talking about his wonderful ideas, which people can enjoy, but it isn't the essence of the way Swamiji has trained us to share these teachings because of the concept of attunement, which I'll talk about in a moment. But he said to me at that time that my problem was that I was too aware of what people wanted to hear, and I often chickened out and just told them what they wanted to hear, which is in the context of a woman who came to our church briefly, as you will be able to tell from the end of this story. She was traveling around, going to many different, what you might call New Age places. There were more of them at that time. And she said, every church I go into, every New Thought church I go into, they all talk about overcoming the ego, how it's necessary to transcend our limitations. And then she sort of looked at me like this, but I think you people actually mean it. And she never came back. Because we can't help but have this thought in our mind. It's a paradox. It's a very interesting paradox. In order to become even slightly interested in the path of self-realization, one has to have a creative relationship to the world around us. Creative in the sense that nobody is telling us that the purpose of our lives is to transcend limitation and become one with God. We go to, decades of school, and it's never mentioned. If it's mentioned at all, it's mentioned somewhat in a cynical tone, or you have in the Western world, you have a unit on Hinduism which lasts a very brief period of time, in which they tend to present to you the most incomprehensible to the Western mind images, of gods and goddesses. And years ago, the first time, it was either the first or second time that we took a pilgrimage trip to India. For about 20 years, 4 of us took groups of Americans over to India. The first trip we took, I'd never been there. I'm leading a trip, and I had never been to the country. But I knew a lot about Master, so I could do it. And we had a tour guide in the city of Varanasi, wonderful man who gradually became a very good friend of ours, who was extremely proud of his city, and he was very proud of his heritage. And something happened that we gradually began to understand, which is that every so often our entire pilgrimage would be kidnapped by some local guide who would just take possession of and take us where he wanted us to go, regardless of whether we wanted to go somewhere. So he kidnapped us and took us, all 30 of us, to this ancient Durga temple in Varanasi, which was beautiful. Well, let me phrase it differently. No, it wasn't beautiful at all. It was intensely old, it was very neglected, and it was filled with monkeys, which is a problem in the city of Varanasi because ahimsa prevents anybody from getting rid of them, so they proliferate. It's a crazy world we live in where absolutes are not easy to find. So we're there at this Durga temple. Now I'm remembering the whole thing. I'd forgotten all the parts of this. And there was a pujari, there was a priest there, because I was group leader. He felt it was necessary to honor me, and his concept of honoring me was that I had to wear a marigold garland the whole time I was there. The problem was that it was past its sell date, the marigold garland, so it was on the other side of fragrance, and it had a slightly, an odor that was making me a little sick. And he kept putting it on me, and then I would sneak off somewhere and take it off, and then he would find me again, and then he would put it on me. So I was not having a lot of positive thoughts. I was angry I wasn't angry, I was annoyed. I was annoyed with the guide. I was annoyed with the pujari. I was annoyed with the marigolds. And I was really annoyed with Durga. Just like, can't you do something about this place? And there were monkeys everywhere. And you had to walk carefully because they were there and the people had sticks to protect you. And I just was not having a happy time. And I'm walking along, and I was so preoccupied with my negative thoughts that I didn't notice where the monkeys were. And I walked between, I think, a monkey and her baby, which anyone with a brain would not do, but mine wasn't working. And so the monkey jumped on my back. Right. And apparently I'm much more courageous than I would have thought I would have been. This is what I understood later. I grabbed the monkey with both hands, just grabbed him, pulled the monkey off my back, threw him on the ground, and said, "Get off of me, you filthy thing," just like that. At which point there was a huge commotion because white woman group leader is being attacked by monkey in Durga temple. This doesn't play well in the press. So one of those pujaris came over with a stick and got rid of, oh no, there was a step in between. I threw him on the ground, but he was not going to take that. And I had on this skirt, fortunately. And he just closed his mouth over my skirt. Monkeys have real teeth. He closed his mouth over my skirt, but I was still in the superwoman mode. Let go of me, let go of me. I'm still shouting like this. That's when the people came in. And so he took this big bite out of my skirt, like that. I mean, it would have been a big bite out of me if it had been me, but he just pulled a big bite out. And then everything calmed down, and it was right. And all of a sudden, I felt Durga. Durga rides a tiger. She's a fighter. She comes on, and she basically said to me, "How dare you, you little twerp? You think that it matters that there's monkeys in this temple? You think it matters that the marigolds, are not fresh? What do you think I am in this world?" And it was like, oh, right. I just was like, it was magnificent. That's the only thing I can think of. It's like there is a power in this world, my friends. When Jesus said, "I am the vine, and all that serves me will flourish, and all that does not serve me will be cut off and cast into the fire." Who wants to hear that? We want to hear, use your affirmations and manifest what you want and have your nice home and, you can have it all, but you can't. And so maybe I won't see a lot of you next week, but we can't. We were not born for trivialities. And there are powers. There's this power of Durga in that temple. It's been there longer than anybody can remember. And people have the sense to revere it and to not pay attention. Yes, of course, you can make the material world more organized, and it's nice. And I actually understand. I'm talking 1987. I understand the city of Varanasi has quite changed since the last time I was there, and I'm very eager to go back. It's my favorite place practically in the world. Close to it. Jerusalem is a big competitor right now, but Varanasi is just, it's what it is. It's the oldest inhabited city in India, and Master moved to Los Angeles because it was the Varanasi of the West. He used as the standard that city, and that Los Angeles would come close to it. But what I'm talking about is that we are just little bubbles moving through, and we have a job which is really, really different than the job we think it is. Speaking, because now I'm back traveling in India, When we went up to, we went to Deva Prayag right there, where the two big rivers come together. Forgive me, I can't keep the names in mind. But because it's India and not America, because somebody would get sued if somebody fell in the river, there would be all these layers of protection. In India, you just walked right down to where these two enormous rivers are meeting each other, and you can just step right into the river and kind of vaguely hold on to this little chain so that you don't get swept away forever. Fortunately, on that trip, we had a couple of really big, strong people. One woman who was an EMT firefighter, and I asked her to please stand in the river and basically hold on to people. And I stood right at that confluence, probably a step or two down in the water, and I watched those two rivers come together. Tumultuous, twisting water. And I'm not suicidal as a rule, but nonetheless, you think about how easily your body could just break. I mean, it would have been so easy to take 4 steps in and just go into that river, but it wasn't my dying per se that I was thinking of. It was how indifferently the rivers would just take my life. They wouldn't notice me any more than they'd notice a pebble. The entire universe would just, there it would go, and then my little body would be gone. I had the feeling there would be a lot of consternation from the people on the bank who watched me disappear in the river, but the river just, oh, there you are, like that. Now, such thoughts can be terrifying. They can be exhilarating. It just depends on how we look at it. You know, we get so absorbed in this microcosm, and we have to work it. We do not get free by living badly. There's a story about a man that Yogananda met, and the man was just disorderly and disheveled, and he announced that he'd given up everything, he'd renounced the world, and Master said, no, he said, you have embraced disorder is what you have embraced. You're not really a free, you're just chaotic. So it's not like we can just drop out and just wander around on the streets unless we really are transcending. We have to do this, and especially our incarnation right now, this time right now. If we're lucky enough to be born, like when Jesus was born, Kali Yuga descending, that's when it's just getting worse and worse, and at 500 AD, all of civilization is wiped out, and the libraries are burned, and everything like that. What happened with Jesus' disciples is they didn't try to build anything. They didn't try to make something in this world because it was a descending age. They got to just go off with God into secluded monasteries, into desert solitude, and do that which was the most important thing, which was inner attunement, and to become one with that power. But they just didn't have to do all that we're doing. Whereas Master even comes from India, from where the soil itself inspires this, as Master writes, where men dream God is how he described it. The Master's last words, my body is hallowed. I am hallowed, my body touched that sod. That's really quite a statement, isn't it? That was his feeling for that country, but at the age, in his early 20s, he was sent by the Masters to live in Los Angeles and to travel around this country where people knew nothing about any of this, and to fight this intensely materialistic culture, which only gets worse and worse and worse. But at the same time, it's Dwapara Yuga rising. We're going up. We're building for a future. This is the way the mission of the Masters works. I mean, whether it's a high age or a low age, whether the libraries, the barbarians are in charge, or whether, well, when I asked Swami once, I was so tired of being on this planet. Sir, I said, next time you incarnate, please come in Satya Yuga. Please come in a high spiritual age. It's just, I was just teasing him, but still, And he said, first he said, it's still the material plane. He said, it's just still the material plane. It's not God realization. But then he said, people like us are in charge. I said, so the whole planet then runs like Ananda? He said, yes. I said, well, that would be pleasant. But he said, but it's still the material plane. Meaning that we were born for more. You know, even if it's not the worst of times, we're still intensely bound by our own limitations. We are a little branch, and we think that we are the source and we are the power. But what happens to us quite simply is that we are not. And sooner or later we start running into that reality. And that's the world that we're living in right now. Just a moment, I lost my thought. So that's why, this is why, okay, let me come back to this here. You know, how do you say that? When Master talked to his disciples, and this is what Swami references in the reading, he talks about the fact that when Master talked in public, he talked about many different aspects of the spiritual path. He was a master at speaking to his audiences. If you, there's this free email that you can get every day from Ananda.org. If you don't get it, you should write to them and ask. And it's this day in the life of Paramhansa Yogananda. And I think it was actually our attorney, John Parsons, who worked with us for a long time and wrote the book, Fight for Religious Freedom, about 12 years of litigation that we have to go through. He became very interested in Master, and he did a lot of intense research, and he found out as much as he could of where Master was every day of the month for as many years as he could. So you get this email that says, this day in the life of Paramhansa Yogananda. And there's many charming aspects about that, just to tune in about how much he traveled, but also play incident after incident of where he was, who he was talking to, the Women's Literary Society of St. Louis, Missouri, you know, the Men's Business Association of Seattle, Washington. And each one, he would have some topic that was of interest to them. You know, it might have been like, you know, romantic characters through Indian history, or parallels between the epics of India and the poetry of so-and-so, or about, you know, how to be optimistic and cheerful, or how to find your true life partner, how to be successful in marriage, or my absolute favorite one is, you know, healing yourself, and well, that's how it works, but it says like, engage the super conscious healing power. And then it says, bring your sick friends. That's what it says. And when Master would speak, he would do miracles on the stage. I mean, he would do phenomenal things on the stage. He would invite like physicians. Are there any doctors in the house? And 2 doctors would come, and he would make his pulse different. One would count the pulse on one side, one would count it on the other, and it was different. And then it would stop on this side and continue on this side. He would just be breathing, and then he would stop breathing. It just like all these different things to get everybody's attention. Think about this. This is the 1920s and 1930s in the United States. He has long hair, which in it of itself was unusual. He has dark skin at a time when this was not. We didn't have the world we live in now. In fact, when he went in the South, they considered him to be what they called Negroes at that point, and he wasn't allowed to speak to desegregated audiences, and he finally just left Florida where he was. But in the U.S., here he was. So he's up there like this. He wears his orange robes. He speaks English, but with that wonderful Indian accent, although he learned English after he started coming to America, but you can hear his voice. He was so phenomenal, and he was completely like nothing they'd ever seen before, because he was like nothing they'd ever seen before. They didn't even know why. And here's the other part of it, which is just fascinating. he went back and forth across this country. Several of these campaigns, he called them. He just gathered himself up and went on these spiritual campaigns like this. And he went to most of the major cities over the course of many years. He spoke in the biggest halls, the symphony halls or whatever it was, thousands of people, because he was such a phenomenon. And he met this man coming across on the boat, in the way of God's way of doing things, who was a promoter. And so he made big life-size pictures of Yogananda, the Swami Yogananda he was then, and they put them outside the theaters, and all these people would stream in. One moment in the company of a saint is your raft over the ocean of delusion. That's what it says that's a traditional saying. It's a song. One moment in the company of a saint. Master stood there like this. Thousands of people were having their moment in the company of a saint. Rajasi Janakananda, who became his most advanced disciple, saw Master's picture on a billboard. And he thought, what an unusual looking woman. That's what he thought. And then somehow or another, a few days later, he ended up in the lecture hall, and it took him a few moments to realize that the man talking to him was that unusual looking woman. It's just like it just rolled through the country. We have no idea. We have no idea what seeds were planted from all of that happening, because we think we're running our little lives. We are the branches. The divine is the core power of it. And we are so interested in just doing it our way, and we sort of carefully calculate and allow a little bit of God in. We'll listen to this, we'll listen to that. We have to be practical. We have to figure this out. We have to figure that out. We'll like this. But when Master was alone with his disciples, he would talk about attunement. And what he meant by attunement was open yourself to the consciousness that is bigger than yours, that is the real source of who you are. Ask, and it shall be given. Let the word live in you. And the word is not the Bible itself. It's not the scripture. I mean, the Bible is amazing. The Gita is amazing. The Patanjali Yoga Sutras, all of these books, they're phenomenal in their power to communicate. But what you receive from them is not mental ideas that you then just absorb in the ego and become very clever with all of this. What we receive is a different vibration, just simply a different vibration. We are nothing but sound vibrations, and we hold on to this melody that I call myself. This is what I do. This is what I like. This is who I am. These are my limitations. These are my traumas. These are my desires. And meanwhile, there's this pulse that's just going like this. And if we are conscious at all, we open ourselves to this. And if we're deeply conscious as disciples, which is Jesus was talking to his own people, when Master talked to his own people, attune yourself to me. In other words, receive what I'm here to give you. When Jesus was weeping at the last days of his life, because he knew that he had come to liberate these people, to show them the freedom and the joy that was possible, and instead they were going to crush him. And he didn't mind being crushed. He was an avatar. He wasn't attached to his body. He didn't have a personal stake in it. He wept for us. He wept for those he'd come to save, who now will reject him, even on the cross. He watches these people crucifying him, which was like a bad thing to do. And he sees the tragedy of their being this close and instead of opening to it, they're closing to it. And he says, Father, forgive them. But what he's saying is, this is not good karma for these people. But they don't know what they're doing. Jesus, in that moment, what he did was he took the karma from them. "Oh, you poor dears, let me help you. Let me give you a touch of who I am." And wonderful literary stories and fictional things have been written from what that must have been like for those who received it. And you have all the people who were hating Jesus turning toward him. Most profoundly and the most beautiful is St. Paul. St. Paul was not St. Paul, he was Saul, and he was persecuting the Christians everywhere. He was riding around the country, torturing and even killing or imprisoning people who believed in Jesus. He was trying to stamp out that. And he was struck blind on the road to Damascus. He was struck blind, and then he had vision of Jesus. And Jesus said, "My son, what are you doing?" And for several days he was speechless and blind until, I believe, another disciple came. And from that point he fell down as Saul and he rose up as Paul. And then he acted as Jesus wanted him to. And it's a metaphor for all of us. We're struck blind. We're struck blind by very simple things: desire, fear, anger, attachment, laziness, just preference for the known misery over the possibility of setting out on a journey where we can really change. But you see, the wonderful thing about this, and this is where the attunement comes in, it's not like we visualize it in our mind that here we are struggling as ourselves, and then there we are struggling as ourselves. I had always thought when I was a child that I wanted to be happy, that the problem was somehow happiness was the issue. It was weird because, you see, I was happy. I just had a very fortunate life, but I always had that thought. But when I got the right vocabulary, I realized what was bothering me was I knew how limited I was. And I could feel that somewhere there was this power, but how do I get to it? With this little limited vehicle, how do I get to it? But you see, attunement is it. And it's such a strange, it's sort of, counterintuitive is the word that they use. But it's not counterintuitive, it's counter-rational. It's completely intuitive, which is, this world is not what it seems. And there is this river of grace. That's what Durga Mata was saying to me, Durga Mother, when I was there in Varanasi. She sent the monkey to talk to me. "Honey, you don't know what's going on here. Let me give you a story here." She sent the monkey. There is a power. There is a power, and it will either grind you into the dust if you don't cooperate with it, or it will give you bliss like you've never imagined that you could have, give you freedom, give you power. We live in a world that is so insecure right now. I mean, all of us, watching what happens in Ukraine and just realizing just a few months ago, the people in that country in various parts of it had completely other plans and expectations. Now we can justify how and why, what's going to happen to who, but the fact of the matter is none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow. We just don't. And it makes us very, very nervous. And a great deal of the way we run our life is just because we're so nervous, whether we admit it or not. A deep part of us knows how powerless we are. But see, the answer is we are not. We are never alone. We are surrounded by angelic beings. We are in the company of masters. And all they want us to do is just receive what they have to offer. That's what the whole path is, though. That's why we have to have so many techniques. That's why we have to have so many events, so much philosophy, because we have to gradually persuade ourselves that we really can do this. And that when Master says, "To those who think me near, I will be near," that he really means it. When we have these moments of feeling the divine with us, that is not the mistake. That is the time when we have actually stepped into it. And then when Jesus thinks that we're sincere and says, "Okay, well then you don't need that, and then you don't need that," And we say, yes, yes, but, I do. No, actually, we don't. But it's a long journey. We were at Spiritual Renewal Week. Many of us were for the last week. And every time you go there, and you can get all the talks online, all these different people who are part of Ananda, and some people who are newer and some who, like myself, have been there for decades. And it wasn't like set up to be this, but it really was. It was one long testimony for the fact that the spiritual path works. And I'm always a little in between. I'm pretty forthcoming about my own life, but every hero that I listened to this week, I know how they got there. I know how hard won that freedom is. And I also know there's nothing else in this world worth striving for. Everything else just vaporizes. But we continue to exist. Swamiji said it to me when as it happened, my mother had just died, and I was sort of asking Swami basically, where is she, what's she doing? And Swami said, just like this, nothing happens when you die. Nothing happens when you die. Meaning, all we ever live in is our own consciousness, and it doesn't die. The brain dies, the body dies. If I had stepped into that river, I wouldn't have died. This body would have been chewed up, and I wouldn't have been able to be this one. But and all we ever are is what we're attuned to. You see, that's what it says. I was in the Durga temple and I was attuned to being really crabby. And Durga got my attention. And she was present simultaneously with the monkeys and the marigold garland. It's just that which part of it am I going to hear? Which part of it am I going to live with? Which melody am I going to listen to? That's why Master said, basically, be attuned to me. Listen to my melody and sing with me. And if we sing together, you see what it brings us is absolutely everything that we long for. Finally, the bliss of our own nature. That's Master's gift. God bless you.
Yes, it's she, the Divine Mother, she who made the universe. Yes, it's she, the Divine Mother, ruler of every heart's desire. Love more ancient, bliss eternal, may our hearts soon be merged in thee. Yes, it's she, the Divine Mother, she who made the universe. Yes, it's she, the Divine Mother, ruler of every heart's desire. Love more ancient, bliss eternal, may our hearts soon be merged in thee. Love more ancient, bliss eternal, may our hearts soon be